Remember that feeling when your favorite show ends on a to be continued, and you just can't wait for next week? Now imagine that next week never comes. Ever. We're diving into the sitcoms that left us hanging forever with stories so unfinished you'll want to write the endings yourself. Wait till you hear about the guy who never finished his karma list. 1. My Name is Earl. This show had a premise that was pure genius. Earl Hickey, a small-time crook with a long list of bad deeds, wins $100,000 on a scratch-off ticket. The moment he wins, he gets hit by a car and the ticket blows away. While laid up in the hospital, he decides this is karma punishing him. So he makes a list of every bad thing he's ever done and sets out to make amends with every person he's ever wronged, hoping karma will reward him. For 4 seasons, we watched Earl, his goofy brother Randy, and his friends slowly check items off that list. It was funny, it was heartwarming, and it was always hilarious. Then came the season 4 finale. It was a huge 2-part episode where Earl found out that Darnell, the guy who runs the local crab shack, was actually in the witness protection program. The episode ends on a shocking revelation about another character's past. A DNA test reveals that Earl might not be the real father of one of his kids. The episode ends with the words, "To be continued," flashing on the screen. And then silence. The show was canceled. We never found out who the father was, and more importantly, Earl's list was far from finished. He never found his karmic peace, and neither did we. Earl's whole life was about fixing past mistakes, but our next character was a mistake from another planet who landed right in the suburbs. 2. ALF. If you were a kid in the 80s, you knew ALF. The show was about a furry, wisecracking alien from the planet Melmac whose spaceship crashes into the garage of the Tanner family. His real name was Gordon Shumway, but the family called him ALF, which stood for Alien Life Form. The whole show was about the Tanners trying to hide ALF from their nosy neighbors, and more importantly, from the government's alien task force, all while ALF tried to eat their cat, Lucky. It was a massive hit and a pop culture phenomenon. For 4 seasons, ALF was a beloved part of the family, always getting into trouble, but always being protected. But then came the final episode. It was supposed to be a cliffhanger leading into season 5. Some of ALF's friends from Melmac had survived and were coming to pick him up. As ALF was out in a field waiting for the spaceship, the Tanners said their tearful goodbyes. But instead of his friend's ship, a different one appeared. It was the Alien Task Force. They had finally found him. The show ends with ALF surrounded by government agents, his fate completely uncertain. The screen fades to black with the words, "To be continued." The problem was, it never was. The network canceled the show, leaving an entire generation of kids to assume their favorite fuzzy alien was taken to a lab for experiments. ALF was captured by the government, a truly dark fate. But what if your fate wasn't just dark, but involved becoming one of the undead? 3. Santa Clarita Diet. This show was a wild ride from start to finish. Drew Barrymore and Timothy Oliphant played Sheila and Joel, a pair of married real estate agents living a boring life in the suburbs of Santa Clarita, California. That all changes when Sheila mysteriously becomes a zombie. But she's not a slow, groaning kind of zombie. She's a high-energy, super confident version of herself who just happens to need to consume human flesh to survive. The show was a hilarious and gory mix of family comedy and horror, as the family tried to keep Sheila's new lifestyle a secret while finding bad guys for her to eat. The show was building up a whole mythology with ancient knights, Serbian curses, and a mysterious talking head in their basement named Gary. The 3rd and final season ended on the biggest cliffhanger imaginable. Sheila, in a moment of passion, bites her husband Joel on the neck. The idea was that this would make him undead like her, so they could be together forever. As Joel passes out, a little spider-like creature, one of the sources of the undead curse, crawls into his ear. The show ends right there. We never find out what happens to Joel. Does he become a zombie? Does he become something else entirely? We'll never know, and it's a crime. The family in Santa Clarita had to deal with the supernatural in secret. Our next hero made a living out of dealing with the supernatural, but his powers came with a very weird catch. 4. Pushing Daisies. There has never been another show quite like Pushing Daisies. It was a visual masterpiece, a fairy tale come to life. The show was about Ned, a humble pie maker with an extraordinary gift. He could bring dead things back to life with a single touch. But there were 2 rules. First, if he touched them a second time, they would be gone forever. Second, if he left them alive for more than 1 minute, something else of equal value nearby would have to take its place. He uses his power to solve mysteries by reviving victims just long enough to ask them who did it. The central story was his romance with his childhood sweetheart, Chuck, whom he brought back to life. Because of his power, they could never touch again. The show was full of charm, witty dialogue, and beautiful visuals. But it was canceled after just 2 seasons, leaving a mountain of unresolved storylines. We never got a real resolution for Ned and Chuck's untouchable love story. We never found out the full story behind Chuck's mysterious father or Ned's estranged dad. The show was a puzzle with 100 pieces, and we only got to see about 50 of them put together. It was a beautiful, unique show that deserved a proper ending. The pie maker could bring people back, but our next hero was more concerned with sending souls back to where they belonged, whether they liked it or not. 5. Reaper. This show was a fun and clever supernatural comedy that felt like a cousin to shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It was about Sam Oliver, a regular guy working a dead-end job at a hardware store. On his 21st birthday, he learns a shocking secret his parents kept from him. Before he was born, they promised their firstborn son to the devil. Now, the devil, played with slimy charm by Ray Wise, has come to collect. Sam's new job is to work as a bounty hunter for the underworld, tracking down escaped souls and sending them back using special vessels like a magic dirt devil vacuum cleaner. With the help of his 2 lazy best friends, Sock and Ben, Sam battled a new demon every week. The show was building to a huge conclusion. Over 2 seasons, Sam started developing strange powers, making him wonder if he was more than just human. The big question was whether Sam was actually the son of the devil. The series finale left us hanging in the worst way. Sam and his girlfriend Andy are having a tender moment, but the devil sends Sam on another mission. When Sam refuses, the devil sends a swarm of demons after Andy, leaving her fate completely unknown. We never found out if Andy was okay or if Sam was truly the spawn of evil. Sam was stuck working for a supernatural bad guy. But imagine if your dad wasn't the devil, but an actual cartoon barbarian from another dimension. 6. Son of Zorn. This sitcom had one of the most brilliantly weird concepts ever. It was a mix of live action and animation. Zorn was a He-Man-style animated warrior from the fictional faraway island of Zephyria, a land of monsters and magic. After years of fighting epic battles, he decides to move to boring, real-life Orange County, California, to try to reconnect with his ex-wife, played by Cheryl Hines, and their teenage son, Alan. So you had this giant cartoon barbarian trying to get a desk job, understand office politics, and be a good dad in a world he didn't understand. The comedy came from Zorn trying to apply his warrior logic to everyday problems, like using a sword of darkness to slice a meatloaf. But the heart of the show was his relationship with his son, Alan, who was mostly embarrassed by him. The show was canceled after 1 season, and it ended on a real doozy of a cliffhanger. Alan, who had always been ashamed of his Zephyrian heritage, decides to embrace it. He's about to go on a dangerous quest to Zephyria with his dad. In the final shot, we see that his legs, which were always live action, have suddenly become animated, just like his dad's. It was a huge step for his character, and we never got to see the adventure that followed. Zorn struggled to connect with the modern world, which is something the employees at our next company understood all too well, thanks to their morally bankrupt employer. 7. Better Off Ted. Better Off Ted was a comedy that was way ahead of its time. It was a sharp, brilliant satire of corporate culture. The show was about Ted Crisp, a senior executive at Viridian Dynamics, a company that was hilariously evil. Viridian Dynamics would invent things like weaponized pumpkins, uncomfortable office chairs to increase productivity, and meat grown in a lab that was mostly cow. Ted would break the fourth wall and talk directly to the camera, explaining the absurd and morally questionable things his company was doing. The show was more about the weekly hijinks than a long-running story, but its cancellation still felt like a major loss of closure. The whole point of the show was that Viridian Dynamics was a soulless, unstoppable force of nature that put profit above all else. The lack of a finale meant that, in a way, the show's point was proven. Viridian just keeps on going, making the world a slightly worse and much weirder place, and we just don't get to see it anymore. We never saw Ted's boss, Veronica, get any kind of comeuppance, or the two quirky scientists, Lem and Phil, ever escape their bizarre lab. The story wasn't over. We just stopped being allowed to watch it. The people at Viridian Dynamics had to put up with a crazy boss, but our next hero had to put up with a roommate who was truly a nightmare. 8. Don't Trust the Bee. In Apartment 23, this show was a blast of pure, chaotic energy. It centered on June, a naive and optimistic girl who moves to New York City for her dream job. When the company goes under on her first day, she's left broke and homeless. She ends up moving in with Chloe, played by Chris Ten Ritter, who is the Bee from the title. Chloe is a wild, unpredictable party girl with no morals who makes a living by scamming everyone around her. She's also, for some reason, best friends with the actor James Van Der Beek, who plays a hilarious, exaggerated version of himself. The show was all about the strange friendship that formed between the innocent June and the cynical Chloe. It was fast, it was witty, and it was always surprising. The show was canceled abruptly in the middle of its second season, and the remaining episodes were burned off out of order. This meant there was absolutely no sense of an ending. The last episodes aired showed Chloe trying to sabotage June's new relationship and June considering moving out. Their entire friendship, the core of the show, was left in a state of chaos. We never saw if they would patch things up or go their separate ways for good. June and Chloe's friendship was a mess, but at least they had each other. The group of friends in our next show was so perfect, fans couldn't believe when they just disappeared. 9. Happy Endings. For 3 seasons, Happy Endings was arguably the funniest and quickest sitcom on television. The show started with a wild premise. A woman named Alex leaves her fiancé, Dave, at the altar, which complicates the lives of their 4 mutual friends. The show quickly evolved into a hangout comedy about a group of 6 friends in Chicago who were masters of rapid-fire jokes, pop culture references, and insane running gags. The chemistry between the cast was electric, and every episode was packed with more laughs than most sitcoms manage in a whole season. Fans were devastated when the show was canceled. The writers, knowing they were on the bubble, tried to give the fans a little something in the finale. The final episode focused on the long-running will they or won't they between Alex and Dave. After 3 seasons of back and forth, they seem to finally confess their feelings for each other. They hold hands, share a meaningful look, and that's it. The show ends. Did they get back together for real this time? Would it work? We'll never know. For a show called Happy Endings, it gave its fans one of the most unhappily unresolved endings possible. Happy Endings was about friends navigating their late 20s, but our next show was about a group of kids just starting to figure things out in their first year of college. 10. Undeclared. Before he became a movie-making powerhouse, Judd Apatow created a little show called Freaks and Geeks. When that was canceled too soon, he made Undeclared. This show was a realistic, funny, and heartfelt look at college life. It followed Stephen Karp, a nerdy high school kid who decides to reinvent himself in his freshman year of college. The show had an incredible cast of future stars, including Jay Baruchel, Seth Rogen, and Charlie Hunnam. It perfectly captured the awkwardness and excitement of being on your own for the first time. The show was praised by critics, but couldn't find a big enough audience, so it was canceled after just one season. The main storyline that was left hanging was the relationship between Steven and Lizzie. They had a complicated on-again, off-again romance throughout the season. In the final episode, Lizzie is about to go on a trip to Europe for the summer, and Steven's overbearing dad shows up at his dorm. The episode, and the series, ends with Steven and Lizzie's future completely up in the air. We never knew if they would make it as a couple, leaving their college romance frozen in time. College life in Undeclared was cut short, but at least they weren't put on ice for decades like the students in our next show. 11. Glow. Okay, this one is technically more of a dramedy, but it had so many hilarious moments that it deserves a spot on this list. Glow was based on the real-life 1980s women's wrestling league, the Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. The show was about a group of struggling actresses and misfits in Los Angeles who find unexpected stardom in the world of spandex and body slams. It was a vibrant, funny, and emotional show with a killer 80s soundtrack and a ton of heart. It was praised for its amazing cast of characters, especially the rivalry and friendship between Ruth Zoya, the Destroyer Wild star, and Debbie Liberty Bell Egan. Here's where the story gets truly painful. The show was a critical darling and a fan favorite. It was officially renewed for a fourth and final season, which was supposed to wrap everything up. They even started filming it. But then the global pandemic hit in 2020, and production was shut down. Because of the show's physical nature and large cast, the network decided it was too difficult to continue and reversed their decision, canceling the show. It ended after season 3, with the wrestling league in Vegas falling apart and the characters scattering. Ruth makes a huge career decision, turning down an offer that would change her life. We never got to see the fallout of that choice, or say a proper goodbye to these gorgeous ladies. The ladies of Glow were trying to find their place in the world, a mission shared by the original versions of some of history's most famous figures, who were all stuck in high school together. 12. Clone High Original Run. Long before it was brought back for a modern reboot, the original Clone High was a cult classic that aired on MTV in the early 2000s. The premise was pure insanity. A secret government agency has cloned famous historical figures and placed them all in the same high school. The main characters were the awkward Abe Lincoln, the popular party girl Cleopatra, and the artistic, angst-ridden Joan of Arc. Abe was in love with Cleo, while Joan was secretly in love with Abe. It was a hilarious parody of teen dramas, packed with clever historical jokes. The show was canceled after one brilliant season, and it ended on what might be the most infamous cliffhanger in animation history. At the winter prom, all the major plot lines come to a head. Abe finally realizes he's in love with Joan right after she's been rejected by him and is leaving the prom. He makes a grand declaration of love. At that exact moment, the evil principal, Cinnamon J. Scudworth, enacts his secret plan to turn the clones into a theme park. The entire student body is flash frozen, turned into ice sculptures right at the peak of all the drama. For 20 years, that was the end. A whole cast of beloved characters, literally frozen in time on the biggest cliffhanger imaginable. The students of Clone High were frozen in time. Our next hero thought he was the only person left on the entire planet until he got the shock of his life. 13. The Last Man on Earth. This show started with a simple, high-concept idea. What if you were the last man on Earth? Will Forte starred as Phil Miller, a regular guy who survives a mysterious virus that wipes out almost everyone on the planet. The first few episodes are a lonely, hilarious look at one man's descent into madness. Of course, he soon discovers he's not alone. He finds other survivors, and they form a weird, dysfunctional little community. The show was great at being both incredibly silly and surprisingly emotional. Over 4 seasons, the group faced all sorts of challenges, from personality clashes to a dwindling supply of bacon. The show had a knack for ending its seasons on big cliffhangers, but the final one was a killer. After finding a new, perfect place to settle down in Mexico, the group discovers they are not alone. In the final scene of the entire series, they are surrounded by a group of mysterious people wearing gas masks and hazmat suits. Who are they? Are they friendly? Are they dangerous? We see the survivors' terrified faces and then cut to black. The show was canceled, leaving them and us facing a group of strangers forever. The survivors in Last Man on Earth were faced with a mysterious new group of people. But our next character was a mysterious being himself, an alien trying to raise 2 human kids. 14. Migo. In the 90s, there were a lot of sitcoms about weird family situations, and this one might be one of the strangest. Migo starred Bronson Pinchot, who was famous for playing Balky on Perfect Strangers. In this show, he played Migo, a 9,000-year-old alien from the planet Marizon. After his spaceship crashes on Earth, he is discovered by a single dad and his 3 kids. To hide his identity and learn about humans, Migo pretends to be a nanny for the children. The show also featured a very young Michelle Trachtenberg and Jonathan Lipnicki. The premise was that Migo was just trying to bide his time until he could repair his ship and go home. The comedy came from his alien misunderstanding of human customs. Truth be told, the show wasn't very good, and it was canceled extremely quickly after only 6 episodes had aired. Because it was pulled off the air so fast, there was no closure of any kind. We never found out if Migo ever fixed his spaceship. We never learned if he made it back to his home planet. He was just a weird alien nanny, and then he was gone, his story not so much ending as simply ceasing to exist. Migo was an alien pretending to be a normal guy. Our next character might have been an angel pretending to be a normal woman, but we'll never know for sure. 15. Angel from Hell. This sitcom had a fantastic premise that hinged on one single question. Jane Lynch, a master of comedic timing, played a woman named Amy. Amy inserts herself into the life of a young doctor named Allison, played by Maggie Lawson. Amy claims that she is Allison's guardian angel, sent to guide her and help her make the right choices. The thing is, Amy is loud, strange, and loves to drink. The entire show's hook was the mystery. Is Amy really a celestial being, or is she just a charismatic but mentally unstable woman who has become obsessed with Allison? Each week, the strange advice Amy gave would somehow work out in a miraculous way, making you believe she really was an angel. But then she would do something so crazy, it would throw it all back into doubt. The show was a fun, is she or isn't she? Mystery. Unfortunately, the network didn't have faith and canceled it after just 5 episodes. A few more were released online, but the central question was never answered. We were left to wonder forever if Allison really had a guardian angel, or if she just had a very dedicated and strange stalker. It was a divine comedy that never got its final judgment. We never found out if Amy was an angel, but our next main character was definitely a mom who was just trying her best, even if it led to some really awkward situation. 16. I'm Sorry. This is another heartbreaking case of a show that was a victim of bad timing. I'm Sorry was a wonderfully cringe-worthy and hilarious sitcom created by and starring Andrea Savage. She played a comedy writer named Andrea, who was navigating life as a wife and a mother. The show's humor came from her tendency to get into incredibly awkward situations because of her own immaturity and lack of a filter. It was a show for anyone who has ever felt like they're just pretending to be a grown-up. It was smart, relatable, and painfully funny. The show ran for 2 great seasons and was loved by critics. It was officially renewed for a 3rd season, and the writers had already written all the episodes. But before they could start filming, the 2020 pandemic shut everything down. The network eventually decided to reverse its renewal and canceled the show, saying it was too hard to produce under the new safety rules. So the story just stops. There was no big cliffhanger, but the lack of a conclusion feels just as bad. Andrea's life of hilarious mishaps was cut short, leaving fans without a proper goodbye to a truly original and funny series. Andrea's story was cut short by real-world events, but our next show was about a man trying to start a whole new life after a personal tragedy, only to have that cut short too. 17. Go On. After the end of Friends, Matthew Perry starred in a number of sitcoms, and Go On was one of the most promising. He played Ryan King, a sarcastic sports radio host who is grieving after the passing of his wife. His boss forces him to attend a support group called Transitions to deal with his feelings. The show was about the strange and funny bond that forms between the members of this support group, each dealing with their own kind of loss. It was a great mix of humor and heart, showing how people can find a new family in the most unexpected places. The show was building towards a sweet potential romance between Ryan and the group's leader, Simone. Ryan had spent the whole season closed off and emotionally unavailable, but he was finally starting to open up again. In the final episode of the 1st season, Ryan and Simone share a really sweet, meaningful moment that hints at the start of a relationship. It was the perfect setup for a 2nd season where we could see Ryan finally move on and find happiness again. But the show was canceled, leaving that potential romance as just a hint of what could have been. Ryan's journey of healing was left unfinished. Ryan's future romance was left hanging, much like the fate of 2 brothers in our next show who were wrapped up in a TV show about the law. 18. The Grinder. The Grinder was a clever meta sitcom with a hilarious premise. Rob Lowe played Dean Sanderson, a famous actor who just finished a long run playing a brilliant lawyer on a popular TV show called The Grinder. Believing that playing a lawyer on TV has given him actual legal skills, he moves back to his small hometown in Idaho to join his family's real law firm. His brother, Stuart, played by Fred Savage, is a real lawyer who is constantly frustrated by his brother's TV logic approach to the law. The show was a brilliant parody of legal dramas and a funny look at family dynamics. It was constantly winking at the audience, aware of its own ridiculousness. The show was a critical favorite, but struggled to find a big audience, so it was canceled after 1 season. The finale ended on a cliffhanger that was perfectly in line with the show's style. Stuart, the responsible brother, ends up in legal trouble himself. The last we see, his fate is uncertain, and he might even be heading to jail. We never found out what happened to him, or if his delusional actor brother could actually use his grinder skills to save the day. The characters on The Grinder were obsessed with how things work on TV. Our next show took that idea to the next level, sending characters back in time to change history itself. 19. Making History. This was a fun, high-concept sitcom that played with time travel in a really funny way. It was about Dan, a nerdy facilities manager at a college who discovers a way to travel back in time using a giant duffel bag. He travels back to the American Revolution to impress a colonial woman named Deborah, played by Leighton Meester. The problem is, by trying to look cool, he accidentally messes up major historical events, like delaying Paul Revere's ride. To fix his mistakes, he has to recruit Chris, a stuffy history professor, to help him set the timeline straight. The show was a fun romp through history, with the trio constantly trying to fix the butterfly effect of their actions. It was canceled after just 9 episodes, but it ended with a pretty big change for one of the characters. Deborah, the woman from the 1770s, decides to stay in the present day with Dan. The final episode shows her getting a modern makeover and a new identity to start her life in the 21st century. It was a huge step for her character, leaving her as a literal fish out of water. We never got to see her adjust to modern life or see what new historical messes the guys would get into.